Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to succeed. Picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 165. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Garrett Delph. Garrett's mission is to help medium to large businesses transform operational chaos into system-led cultures that are repeatable and sustainable into the future. As a founder, CEO, operator with proven and demonstrated success, he has spent the last 25 plus years building and scaling 3 businesses worldwide. With established subject matter expertise in leading and scaling people, processes, and culture. Garrett has a deep understanding of the critical role technology-first operational leadership plays in organizational success, particularly in specialized and high-stakes environments. One of his professional strengths is the systematic elimination of chaos through the implementation of proprietary operational frameworks, optimization of processes, alignment of teams, and the driving of sustainable growth. The culmination of his approach is a sturdy operational transformation to ensure repeatable and sustainable success. Garrett, so glad to have you on the show today.
Hey, thanks so much, Natalie. It's really great to be here.
So I want to shift it to you because, frankly, that bio wiped me out a little bit. That was quite the
I was listening,
quite
going,
the intro. You're like, wow, I cannot write it. Sometimes I feel the same way. Oh my goodness, what do they put in there? Right.
My first to do item is to shorten that thing down by about 65%.
And I know you're in California, so you have even an earlier time than I am. But I was like, that certainly woke me up. Just going through all the multisyllabic words, but really a lot of interesting things in there. But tell us your version of it. Let's not necessarily trim it down because I'm sure you're going to expand on it even more.
Sure.
But let's get right to the essence of it. Who are you? What's your backstory? And how did that get you to where you are today?
Yeah, great. I'm happy to share. Thanks so much. Prior to us getting on the show, we were just talking about, things we might talk about. And it jogged a memory for me of some early childhood stuff where, as kids, we would ask our parents, can we have money to go bowling? And they're like, if you want to go bowling, go earn your own money and pay for it. And so I can remember, all the way back to like 3rd grade, we would go collect cans so we could, pay for stuff we wanted. And that sort of, now that I think about it, led me on a journey all the way up through the end of high school, where I was just always trying to hustle so I could have my own money. And I think that was some really, in hindsight, then it was horrible. Just didn't like it.
Right.
In hindsight, what great building blocks and what great reps and muscle building skills for self-sufficiency and hard work, because life ends up being full of that. Anyways, I went to college, did that whole thing, got into corporate America, got into sales and management. And after about, 10 years of corporate America, I just didn't like it anymore. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I definitely didn't want to work for anybody. So that led me down the path of being an entrepreneur. And had a couple little hustles until I landed on some stuff that I really loved, and that led me into my journey of building business. And very green, not knowing anything about how to do that, and with that came a ton of failures, of course. But fortunately, my dad, and by God's grace, had instilled in me this mindset of always learn, apply what you learn, and then be better, and then rinse and repeat. And that really was very profound for me, and led me into it. Was a guiding light, I guess, if you would, into building business. And that journey, as you mentioned in a very long bio, led me through, building a few international companies. And those companies were had bespoke problems that I couldn't find in the marketplace. And so I had to build solutions for scale and growth for the complex problems we were up against. And it was the building of those tools that really led me to establishing Clarity Ops, which is what I'm doing now at halftime of my career. And they're working. And I'm really excited about that. It's one of the things I've been probably most excited about in a long time. And
Wow.
so that's why, that's where I'm at now, and really enjoying bringing that to market, transforming the lives of people in their business and their business itself,
Mhm.
and having a blast talking about it. So I'm really happy to be here with you to talk more.
Super. As a parent, I could relate to the piece at the beginning that you talked about with your childhood and the need to hustle in order to
Right.
build that self-sufficiency.
Mm,
And I hear different views on, this is not a parenting podcast, so we're not going to go too deep into this area. I do believe that it has relevance to leadership in a broader sense,
mm,
but I find it interesting. I do believe to some degree that society has changed. We talk
yeah.
about the kids of the 70s, the kids of the 80s, and parents basically much more hands off and come home when it's dark and that kind of
Right.
thing. And nowadays you have so much more protective parenting and whatnot. And we
Mm,
hand our kids things today that we weren't necessarily handed back in the day. Just
yeah.
thinking about I have married kids myself at this point, and so I'm thinking about their experience into marriage compared to, let's say, mine, just a generation before. But I do think that that kind of spills over into the workplace, because I do believe that younger workers in particular have certain expectations of
Mm,
coming into the workplace, of what's going to be provided for them. What are they looking for in the workplace? If they don't find certain things, or if they feel misaligned in some way, that they're likelier to step out, and find something new or different. I'm curious to know if, because you also stepped away, maybe for other reasons, but I
yeah.
know that you told me that after about a decade, you stepped away from your corporate experience and went on your own.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could speak to that a little bit more. I'm just curious to get your take on what is the role of the leader in terms of providing. You're not talking about just sending them on trips to the bowling alley, though that might
Right.
happen on occasion,
Right.
but providing them with resources, making them work harder, let's say in the sales department. How much are you giving them in terms of leads? How much are you asking them to generate on their own? What's your take on all of that?
Yeah. It's a boy. That's probably sets the stage for many podcasts just on that topic alone. Yeah.
I'm sure.
Um, my um my opinions and position currently has changed many times over the years on this one. Um, but here's where I stand now. Um, I do think it is first and foremost. By the way, I want to preface. I have no experience with venture funded, venture backed businesses. All of my businesses have been bootstrapped, and I have no experience with public companies. And I think those two environments in business probably are radically different from a classic founder built and founder led business environment, which is primarily mine. So that will be, I just want to, calibrate, that will be my lens. And so in those environments, I actually believe it's the founder's responsibility to set the stage and establish the belief systems and the core values in the business. And I do think there's a ton of value in partnering with the great leaders they hire to figure out what they believe. But at the end of the day, I think it's the leadership's responsibility to demonstrate care to the people they hire. And I actually think that care, speaking of being a parent, is sort of parental. You know, sometimes it's tough love, and sometimes it's empathy, and it's sympathy, and it's giving and supportive. It's a I think it's a really healthy balance of both. Um, and you got to be careful if you give too much. all the time without correction and discipline and guidance, you get taken advantage of. And then you set a cultural expectations that this company is a cakewalk, and you get inundated with complacency and expectations of not having to work but still get paid. I experienced that. I wanted to be the great boss. I wanted to be the cool founder. Wanted to make sure that we had ping pong tables and free beer and free coffee and free lunch. And we even had like a nap pod room and foosball, you know what I mean? And but I didn't balance that out with expectations of, oh yeah, that's right. We're actually trying to build a business here so everybody wins and we have gain and profit. And misdirected us for a little while. I had seasons of that. So that's where I'm at now. I think it needs to be a healthy balance of both. And at the end of the day, I really have determined if you're building a business that is for profit, at the end of the day, nobody has jobs if that business doesn't figure out how to do it right and profit.
Sure.
So you have to do your job,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that took
So
me a
let's,
long time to get there.
yeah, well, it takes, I think, all of us a long time to
Yeah.
figure things out, the parenting piece and the leadership
Yeah.
piece. It takes a long time. I mean,
True.
my first book, Becoming the New Boss, was written
Oh,
with the benefit of all the mistakes I made,
love
in
that.
my head of school position. And so oftentimes, we wish that we could go back and undo and redo and rebuild, but even those mistakes, and we'll come back to this concept a little bit later,
Sure.
really help us to refine our processes so that as we become more experienced, we just
Yeah,
become better, typically what we do.
that's
You
great.
did talk before about, maybe indirectly, about messaging, about culture, the
Mm.
role of the leader. So what is your approach, or what have you seen to be successful when leaders are trying to change a mindset, or perhaps even just set the tone in a way where they want to come across as caring and supportive and all the things you talked about, while simultaneously presenting that agenda of, we have to be successful here for all of us to win? What are the actual steps, whether it's one-to-ones, corporate messaging, informational videos? Like, what would be your approach to get people to really understand
Yeah.
what we're all about, and to make sure that they're aligned with that?
Yeah. It's a great question. Um, and I think it's formulaic and it's recipe driven. And so, what's the old adage? If you don't know where you're going, you won't know when you get there. And so I think any effective leader that earns the respect of the people they lead, they in their head and their heart need to be clear about how they're going to accomplish that. And so, number one, I think being clear on what you value, and then not only clear about it, but defining it, documenting it, and publishing it. I know that sounds maybe a little uh, big, but I think it's really important because you have to manage the expectations of the people that you lead. And if they don't understand, for example, that you value accountability and you're going to measure progress and performance, then 50-50 chance they're going to take that the wrong way. And you'll be, you'll miss the boat. Some other things I think that are really important once you do that kind of stuff is a play out of Jeff Weiner, ex-CEO of LinkedIn's playbook, and that is be a constant chief reminder of these things that you value, how you do business, and where you're going. I think that's also critically important. Um, then, going back to this idea of a formula for a leader, once you have those things in place, I think it's really important that a leader establishes credibility in terms of how they operate. So, really great book called The $1 Trillion Coach, Bill Campbell. He talks about it's impossible to be a leader if you first were not a great manager. And there's probably a good debate around that, but I really think in essence what he was saying is a great manager is somebody who is what I call a slice of pie. Pie is an acronym. They're professional, they have integrity, and they have EQ. And they demonstrate that over time. And so when you're a leader, the only way you can lead people is through people respecting what you do and who you are. And so I would say that's the other part of the formula, in my opinion. Just thinking out loud here, but you have to be somebody that is trustworthy, faithful, dependable, timely. You do what you say you're going to do. And then lastly, I would say in terms of you know, uh, being a leader that makes an impact in the organization and helps people be great is support them. Support them, and that could be you'd mentioned it a few minutes ago. That could be L&D, learning and development. That could be as simple as when you see people going through a tough time, roll up your sleeves, perhaps, and lean in with them and find out why they're struggling and offer, be Socratic. How can I help? Or how can somebody here help you break through with what you're struggling with? One last thing, there are more, by the way, I just don't want to keep on going, but I think one other great thing leaders can do for people they hire, and usually when we hire people, we want to hire great people, is give them a career path. I think it's another really great way to support great people who are going to bring value to the business. Give them a roadmap on how you can elevate in title and make more pay. We all have to work for a living. And the reason we work is not for the fun of it. We work because we gotta eat. We gotta make money. So if you can make money and you can be happy and be satisfied in what you do, in working with great people, I think that's a pretty magical scenario.
Sure. Okay. Well, that was a great answer. I'm going to shift back to your bio for a minute.
Okay.
You talk about your mission to help medium and large businesses transform operational chaos into system-led cultures that are repeatable, sustainable into the future. So what is that operational chaos that you're describing? What does that look like? Why does it happen? And how do you help people?
Great. It's like 3 questions. I'll try to, if I miss one of them or a couple of them, please remind me. Chaos, in my opinion, is essentially disorder. It is the absence of order or the lack of order, the lack of governance. So if you can imagine trying to live in New York or LA or any metropolitan city, and they didn't establish logistical sort of transportational signals and systems, you would have chaos. If red lights didn't work or green lights didn't work, or there weren't signs and directions for people when they transport, to signal to everybody which way to go and when to go, you would have disorder and chaos, which cause accidents and fatalities. And we don't think in those terms inside of business usually, which is a narrative I'm pushing heavily for the what I call the future of predictable business. But in business, you have like these 1,000 moving parts of people, process, and performing those processes or not. And and so when you don't plan all of these moving parts in business in an orderly fashion, what you end up with is high stress, low happiness, inefficiencies, bloat, waste. The symptoms of that typically show up on the P&L, and they show up in the lives of the people that work in the business. And so you have anxiety, fear, frustration. You have high employment churn. You have huge good and market delays. You have innovation stalls. You have all of these, negative consequences to the business, and that's a result of ultimately an engine that is broken. And I'm fascinated by that, by the way, because generally businesses focus on finding great leaders, and then those great leaders are essentially responsible for sales and revenue at the end of the day, right? And I'm fascinated with that because if your engine is broken, your driver is only as good and effective as the vehicle engine. So in Formula One, you could have the best driver in the world, but if you have an inefficient engine, that vehicle will never win. As a matter of fact, it'll probably lose badly. And that business, the world of business has proven this with the continued stat of 9 in 10 businesses fail. And my hypothesis is this is systematic related. This is happening in the engine room, but the engine room in business is often so complex that we assign it to other things.
Yeah.
So that's my answer to that 3-part question. I hope I hit them all, Naftali.
Yeah. And so I guess the question is, what advice would you have for CEOs? I know we've talked about managers, but really focusing on the leadership side, if you will, more, to not only, I mean, it sounded to me minimally, don't just focus on sales and revenue, right? Focus on your day-to-day operations, understand it. But I guess to not to push back, but just sort of understand more in terms of your metaphor. So you talked about, let's say, a traffic pattern. So for the most part, assuming you have roads, right? So they intersect at certain points, and just a question of who goes first, at what speed, this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got a business, I would imagine, and you talked about it, a million moving parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does somebody establish order when there's a lot of complexity? What would be some of the steps that you provide or that you've seen successful businesses do that the unsuccessful businesses do not, that have those better engines, so to speak?
Yeah, I think a good place to start is with the end in mind. What is your product or service deliverable? And what is it that your customers value? And what is it you promise to deliver to them? And then work backwards and figure out what are the gaps, the bottlenecks, the breaks, the inconsistencies that are preventing you from achieving your gross margins and from satisfying your customers the way you wanted to, versus the way you are currently. And what that will do is that begins to lift up the hood of the engine and make clear where the problems live. And then, those problems, in my experience, are typically related to, for example, inconsistencies. You have a bunch of repeatable activities in the business done by lots of different people. But when you don't have process, those people do those activities, which are supposed to be the same. They're supposed to have the same benchmarks. They're supposed to have the same delivery TATs. But they're not, and they don't, because you got 100 different people doing them different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's actually very simple to understand. But it turns out to be fairly complex to solve. And so, what I specialize in and what my team specializes in is going in and actually paying focused attention to these 1,000 moving engine parts and fix them, and then fix them in a documented fashion that can be repeated and maintained sustainably into the future. And then you build a maintenance program. You build a maintenance program to make sure that the law of entropy doesn't creep back in and cause it to go from this new established order to disorder again.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say to CEOs is, first and foremost, like, do you value that? I have a really good buddy who leads the LLM, one of the LLM AI programs at Google. And super smart guy, very talented. Prior to going to Google, he was at Stripe. And obviously, Stripe's a very successful company. But turns out they have one of the highest employment churn rates out there. Mostly their ENPS, their employment NPS score, is pretty low. And there's a lot of chaos and frustration in the org. But they're very successful, unhappily.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the founder, the CEO, they really need to decide what they want, because it is a choice. You can have a successful business and just not prioritize these efficiencies that I'm talking about that I tend to value. And I think bring a whole host of really amazing financial and people benefits. But the CEO needs to value it. And they need to value it enough to invest in it and organize and pursue change that will produce better results.
Okay, so that was a great answer. I think there was something that popped up in my mind as you were speaking, especially towards the end there.
Yeah.
So when you have a decision to make, so in this case, it might be a values-based decision based on whether or not you want to have the right kind of culture and
Yeah.
keep people happy and all of that. But it's not necessarily going to be, at least for you and I, it sounds pretty black and white that would be an obvious thing you'd want to pursue.
Right.
But how do you approach, Garrett, in other areas, maybe a little bit more gray, the whole, let's call it pro and con, the whole question of decision making? So I've got some benefits over here, but they're going to come with some challenges, costs, setbacks, delays, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You know, what advice do you give to leaders who are thinking about making a change, pursuing something new, maybe integrating some new technology, maybe scaling up, whatever it is that they have to properly consider all those different components of the pros and the cons, the present and the future. Do you have a method that you use to help people in that process?
Yeah. Risk to reward and cost analysis. Sometimes what you want, you can't afford. So you have to figure out if you can afford it. Sometimes what you want, you actually don't have the runway for. And so you can't do it. Sometimes the ultimate goal of the business can't even be achieved unless you actually stop and rebuild. I like that, so those are my three answers to how do you make the decisions about moving forward and solving problems.
hmm hmm Okay, so one last question I have for you. I know earlier you shared some of your backstory, but I'm curious to know, all great leaders make mistakes,
Mm,
and most of us make a lot of mistakes.
yeah.
What was one mistake in particular that you made that has been, I think, something you refer back to often, something that's really helped position you to become the person you are today?
Mm. It's a great question, Naftali. Okay, so probably the most uncomfortable was the chairman of my board came into my office one time and he was visibly angry. And he said, "Hey, I'm just going to cut to the chase. If you don't stop micromanaging, you're going to kill your business and everybody's going to leave." And that was the first time I swear to you, it's the first time I'd ever heard that term,
hmm
much less understand what it meant,
hmm
which led me on um, a real heart and mind search about like, well, what is that? And why am I doing that? If it is a thing. And it turns out it was a thing.
hmm
And I was micromanaging, but I didn't realize it. And we all, we don't have to get into the negative consequences of being that kind of person or that kind of leader. But it wasn't because I was a control freak for the sake of being a control freak. I mean, I'm sure I have some bad personality traits, but the root of it, and this is where this is a twofer for me. The root of it was I didn't understand how to operate. And I didn't understand, at least for me, that I valued order. I just didn't understand how to create it. And so, in order to compensate for the lack of disorder, I attempted to control things that were out of control. And that was my way of dealing with it. But it was futile. It was futile. And so that's when I began to, and I want to just make sure I overemphasize this by God's grace, because I think He's the giver of this wisdom. I began to recognize increasingly the power, the superpower of organizing people, process, and performance so that you can have control. And when you can have control, great things happen. I do say control in a good sense. And then at that point, that changed. What I learned is when the processes govern And when the frameworks and the systems govern, you don't have to control, they control it for you. All you do is make sure you have accountability to make sure those things are done, and life gets a lot easier.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I was thinking a little bit of leadership in the 1 Minute Manager and the 4 stages that Ken Blanchard and his associates sort of walk you through, from directing, which is a lot of do this and do that, control and command, towards ultimately delegating. So it's got some coaching, it's got some supporting in there, depending on the experience of the individual, depending on their readiness, certain other factors. But oftentimes we don't realize how much we have to be able to take a step back in order to give people the space that they need to feel fulfilled and to feel like they're growing and to feel like, they want to make a meaningful contribution. So thank you for hitting on that point. It's an important one. And I think I was guilty of that many times over in my own work over the years. All right. So we're going to lighten the air a little bit. We're going to shift to the rapid fire, where the answers are short and sweet. First question for you. One book that every leader should read.
The $1 Trillion Coach.
Okay. I thought you might come back to that one. One technological tool you can't live without, personal or professional.
Asana.
A cool thing about San Diego few people know.
Tide pools.
Your favorite way to unwind after a long day.
Watch TV.
Fair enough. A role model who has influenced your career.
Jeff Yoakum.
If you could give one piece of advice to working parents, what would it be?
Balance out what you give with what you expect them to work for.
A food you could eat every day.
Tacos.
Your dream vacation. your dream vacation spot.
New York.
Nice. A superpower you'd love to have.
Influence.
And finally, a productivity tip that helps you to get more done.
Planning.
Okay, so you've given us a lot, but why don't you tell us, please, how people can connect with you, Garrett, how they can learn from you, and just make that connection.
Yeah, thanks, Naftali. Well, I'm on LinkedIn. Garrett Delph is my handle. Of course, there's the website, clarityops.co. Lots of content there, and more information about what our firm does. And maybe my parting remark is just something that I still love to this day. I don't know if any of us can get enough of it inside of business, is you cannot manage what you cannot measure.
That is so powerful. I literally just, I'm trying to remember the context. Yes, I was in front of, I speak to both educators and business professionals all the time. So I talked to teachers and I said, if you don't assess your students, how do you know if they've learned? Right. And of course, with sales, when I do a sales training, all these kinds of things. So metrics are critical. It's got to be specific. It's got to be measurable. No fuzzies. Good stuff. Okay. So we've gotten out of the fuzzies. We've gotten into the details, and we got some really good conversation here. Garrett, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on Lead to Succeed, for contributing your wisdom and for really giving us some very powerful insights. It was a pleasure.
Likewise, Naftali. Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.